From Bloomberg World Headquarters in New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, I'm David Weston. Welcome now to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. Let's get a check on the markets first. Joining us now, that is wrong. Last night, they had a debate out in Cleveland, and it's fair to say that actually we got a lot more heat than we did light as a practical matter.
Everybody knows he's a liar.
But you
I just want to make sure.
Joe, you're the liar.
I want to make sure.
Graduated last in your class, not first in your class.
You're the worst president America has ever had.
Hey,
Come
Joe,
on.
I wear masks when needed. When needed, I wear masks.
Okay, let me ask.
I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away from it. He shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen.
What is the Trump health care plan?
Right. Well, first of all, I guess I'm debating you, not him, but that's okay. I'm not surprised.
The question
Supreme
is,
Court Justice, radical left.
Will you shut up, man?
Listen, who is on your list, Joe? Who's on your list?
Right, gentlemen, I think
this
we've
is
ended
so
this.
He's going to pack the court.
We're
not going to give a list.
We have ended this segment. We're going to move on to the second segment.
That was really a productive segment, wasn't it?
That's a little taste of what we got to see for 90 minutes or so last night. Let's go out to Cleveland now, to our man in Cleveland, our chief Washington correspondent, Kevin Cirilli, who's been there throughout it. So help pick up the pieces this morning. What is the aftermath?
Well, Vice President Joe Biden speaking across town in Cleveland earlier today before getting on a train, and he's going to go to parts of Ohio as well as Pennsylvania to continue campaigning. And he just continued to criticize the president's tone, the debate last night, and trying to move forward. But two other takeaways quickly that I would note, David. First and foremost is that the last 5 minutes of that debate really outlined that we are really getting set up to not know the results on November 3rd and might not know the results for a week, 2 weeks, dare I say a couple of weeks, maybe even into December for the results of that. Both President Trump and Joe Biden saying at the end of that debate that they were prepared to take this and alluding to it all the way through the judicial system. And then finally, it lacks policy. The next debate in a week and a half, 2 weeks from now in Miami is a town hall format. It'll be moderated by C-SPAN's Steve Scully. Maybe we'll get some more policy. Joe Biden tried to say that he's the leader of the party. He said it in very clear terms. Whether or not that alienates the far left flank, people like AOC, we don't know yet. And whether or not that entire debate, if you can even call it that, last night turns off voters from actually turning out to vote is a question that I'm hearing from both sides of the analysis this morning. David?
Okay, thank you so much to Kevin Cirilli for all your reporting out there in Cleveland. Well, last night, the debate, they touched a little bit on economic policy, although it was hard to find it in all of the back and forth and the interruptions. At the same time, the economy needs some help. There is a recovery going on, but clearly it is slowing down, and there's a lot of uncertainty over things like coronavirus and possible shutdowns. To help us sort through what the economy needs to hear from these presidential candidates, whether they heard it or not, we welcome now back to Bloomberg, Blair Effron. He's Centerview Partners co-founder and partner. So, Blair, great to have you with us. As I say, put aside for a moment what we heard or didn't hear last night. What does the economy need to hear? For that matter, what does American business need to hear from the leadership of this country?
Thanks, David, and thanks for having me on. So let's talk about first the economy. We need to not forget we still have 13 million people out of work. That's 3 million more than were out of work in the '08 recession. We have state and local governments being hurt, $500 billion or so of debt taken on just during COVID. We have 7.5 million small businesses at risk. What we really need, and you've heard it from the Fed chair, you've heard it from the Treasury Department, what we really need is a continuation of the good work done in March to get a strong stimulus package so that we can get and maintain on a road to recovery. And frankly, the longer we don't do that, the more we turn this into a deeper hole.
So, Blair,
and in terms of business,
just to stay on the stimulus package for a moment, does it matter how big it is? Because we heard about 3.3 trillion, we heard about 2.2 trillion, we heard about 1.5 trillion. Does it matter if they get it done more than exactly how much it is?
I think the size does matter, David. We really need something substantial. The House is talking about 2.2 trillion. The fact is the $600 unemployment credit has worn off. And what you saw in the early phases of COVID is size really does matter. You want to take a bazooka to it, and you want to be ahead of the curve. And the fact is the rate environment remains incredibly benign. multiples of the stock market remain robust. What does that tell you? It tells you that investors are being patient. They want the recovery to take hold over the longer term, and that the national balance sheet today can handle it. I think if you get the economy growing again, then we can focus at that point what it means for all the various debt figures for the economy. But right now, we need something big, and we need it, frankly, very quickly.
Blair, how anxious is the C-suite, if I can ask you about the C-suite here? If we look at the markets, particularly equity markets, they've held up terribly well. Is there a disconnect here?
I don't think there is. I think, first of all, C-suites and in general have gotten so good about managing through uncertainty. What they really did for the most part during COVID was put their heads down, figure out how to manage the immediate crisis, and frankly, how to think longer term to take advantage of what COVID exposed. Frankly, there's plenty of businesses that looked at the situation and said, if we don't move quickly, we will be disrupted. And if you even think about retail, for example, look what happens with a Walmart or a Target in terms of how well they've done versus some of the less fortunate retailers. And the fact is, what I think you're going to see is a lot of companies saying we need to make investments now so that our businesses are competitive 3 and 5 years from now. And that COVID really sped up a lot of that thinking, whether it was how you deal with the supply chain, how you use technology to your advantage, how you withstand disruption. I think it exposed a lot, and you have a group of executives who said, we're going to really have to take some action. Now, against that, they obviously want to have an environment, a macro environment that is more certain, more steady, and more planful.
Well, let's talk about that macro environment, because that does take us back perhaps to what we heard and did not hear last night in the debate. We do have two very different approaches, I think it's fair to say, in managing the economy between President Trump and former President Biden, Vice President Biden. We have President Trump saying, I want to cut more taxes. I want to have more deregulation, basically. We're going to bring a lot of businesses back on shore. On the other hand, you have Joe Biden saying, we actually may have to raise some taxes for some people because we need to invest more. For the businesses across the country, which are they more inclined to go with?
I think most businesses today see the need for investment. They understand, for example, that China is investing back in R&D at 4 times the rate we are. They understand that getting underserved communities into the 21st century, whether it's broadband, whether it's wiring schools, important. They understand having a set of policies that lets them be rewarded for making the long-term investment and having a set of shareholders that have the right incentives to stay with them long-term is the best thing for growth. And frankly, David, if we grow the economy, everybody benefits. So big point number one. Big point number two, I think there's appreciation that COVID has been unfair. It has hurt the lower income brackets dramatically, severely. And if we're going to have an economy that works for everybody, you've got to invest back in it. So if you look at what Joe Biden is saying, he wants to, over 10 years, invest $5 trillion back into the economy, whether it's in climate, whether it's in manufacturing, whether it's in historically Black colleges, and really recognizing that the more people you can bring along and give opportunity to, the better we all are. And I think most executives appreciate that.
So we're trying to claw our way back out of recession. Typically, you don't raise taxes at a time like that. Are you concerned at all that if, in fact, we did have a Biden plan implemented, that it would slow down growth?
I'm not concerned at all. I think that fundamentally, if you go back to Obama, when taxes at the top end were 39.6, the fact is, in his first term, the market was up 44%, which is higher than it was up in the Trump first term. Employment was better, 2.8 million jobs a year versus 2 million jobs under Trump. So I actually think the key thing for business generally is that we have a long-term focus, a steady course of policy, a reestablishing of our position with allies across the world, but doing it so it's clear in a way that does recognize America's needs first. And I think you'll see broad-based support for that. And I think that fundamentally, again, if you can give more people more opportunity, they become consumers over time. And that helps everybody's business, 70% of the economy.
Blair, as you talk to your clients, are they holding off right now to find out what happens after November 3rd?
Sure. I think that any company that would be thinking about doing something important ought to understand what the landscape's going to look like for 2021 and beyond. And it would be unwise to embark on something important. It doesn't mean that every day you're not doing something to make your business better, every day not figuring out where you want to increase investment. But in terms of big decisions, sure, David, you want to have more certainty as to what the framework's going to look like politically and from a macro perspective.
Blair, you've made no secret of the fact that you overall support Vice President Biden for a lot of the reasons you've just described on this program, in fact. After last night, do you feel better, the same? How do you feel about his chances?
Boy, I don't know if I'm licensed to practice politics. I would say that last night, perspective is he benefited. I understand why. He showed himself to be steady, experienced, and fundamental decency. I think a lot of people are looking to that. So I'll leave it to others to make prognostications about November. But I think that he reassured last night a lot of people who hadn't had enough exposure to him, who said, okay, now I understand what steadiness is going to mean.
And finally, Blair, a lot of us, when we look at economic policy, really focus on the policy part of it, the so-called hard part of it. That's what we do, certainly in the media. A lot of people who analyze this. Is there a soft side? Because one of the things I think we saw in the debate was more a matter of tone rather than of substance. How important is that to the economy and to American business, what the tone is at the top?
Great question. I think tone matters a lot. Obviously, policy matters a lot, but the steadiness at the top is something that the private sector generally looks to. They have enough complications in running their businesses that anything that can reduce that complication, they value. So for Joe Biden to come across and talk to America last night with a steady hand on the tiller, I think does matter. And in terms of policy, I'm looking forward to the next debate, where hopefully both candidates will more comfortably lay out their vision, because Americans deserve it.
Yeah, or at least let one another talk, maybe. Okay, thank you so much, Blair. Really a treat to have you with us. That's Blair Effron. He's co-founder and partner of Centerview Partners. Coming up, we talk with Democratic Congresswoman from Cleveland, Marcia Fudge. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. We turn now to Mark Crumpton because he has Bloomberg First Word News.
David, thank you very much. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson's Conservative Party has struck a deal with rebels from within his own party over giving the UK Parliament more power to scrutinize new emergency coronavirus measures. That move averts a damaging blow to his authority. Speaking at the House of Commons, the Prime Minister said that the risk posed by an increase in virus cases in the UK and Europe calls for swift action.
There is now a serious and growing problem with the resurgence of the virus, and that's why we brought forward the package of measures that we did last week.
The Prime Minister had been warned that more than 100 of his own MPs were preparing to vote against the Parliament if the government didn't compromise. 9 zip codes in New York City account for a quarter of all coronavirus cases citywide. That's according to Mayor Bill de Blasio, who says that parts of Brooklyn and Queens are helping to drive up the rate. The weekly average of positive tests rose slightly to 1.46%, and new daily cases increased to 354 from 338. That uptick comes as the city moves to allow indoor dining to resume starting today, limited to at least 25% capacity. Senate Democrats want Supreme Court nominee Amy Coney Barrett to promise to recuse herself from cases related to the 2020 election. That's after President Trump said the court might decide the outcome, and he expects her to break a tie. Supreme Court justices decide themselves whether to step away from a case. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thanks very much, Mark. Our series on swing states in this election is focused on Ohio this week, a state that President Trump needs to win if he's to be reelected president. Welcome now, Democratic Congresswoman Marcia Fudge of Ohio. Representative Fudge's district includes precincts ranging from Cleveland to Akron. So, Madam Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. First, let me give you your overall reaction of the debate last night in your backyard.
First, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I came away from the debate feeling embarrassed for this nation. I have never seen such a display. I've been to many debates. I've watched many debates. And I have never seen anything like I saw last night.
Did you think there was blame to go on both sides?
Well, I certainly do think so. But I also think this. There was clear difference between tone, between presence, between just caring about the country and not just trying to score points and call names. I think there was a clear distinction. I mean, we couldn't even get through the first set of questions before the president was talking over Joe Biden. I mean, if you look at it, and I heard it this morning on television, they were saying that the moderator admonished the president, I don't know, 70 times or something, and Joe 15. Is that right? No, because the president kept violating the rules. I mean, I've never seen the lack of decorum, the lack of presidential presence that I witnessed last night.
Congressman, give us a sense of what your constituents in your district would have heard last night that would have either helped them or not helped them. Let's talk about some of the needs and the issues there. One of the discussions last night was about racial justice and, yes, violence as well in some of the protests. What did you hear from the two candidates with respect to that? Because as I understand it, your district has a large proportion of African-American voters.
It does. And the first thing that my constituents were concerned about is that they even coupled the two. Race and violence don't have anything in common. So why they would put in place a segment that dealt with race and violence? Race has nothing to do with violence. So my people would have benefited more by them talking about what we do about justice and policing. They would have benefited more about what are we going to do about schools that are falling apart? What are we going to do about housing? What are we going to do about living wages? They would have benefited by that. Because what we have seen, especially in the time of COVID, it has laid bare not only the racial tensions in this country, but it has shown that it is a lack of health care in communities of color that have created a disproportionate number of people of color who are dying from this disease. It has also laid bare that it is the people who look like me and people in our communities who are the front liners. We are the ones who work in the grocery stores. We are the bus drivers. We are the delivery people. We don't make enough money to have insurance, but yet we are the people who have to interact with people every day. So I think that maybe they both could have done better, but certainly I think they could have at least the president admitted, that there is a race problem in this country, because, in fact, there is.
Okay, Congresswoman, it's always good to have you with us. Really appreciate your time. That's Congresswoman Marcia Fudge. She's a Democrat from Ohio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's time now for a market check. We're going now to Scarlett Fu. And Scarlett, as I understand, echoes up because something happening or not happening on Capitol Hill, as Steve Mnuchin maybe is going up to talk to Nancy Pelosi.
Maybe happening. How about that? We'll leave it with that. And it's been that way for a couple of weeks now. Look, it's the last trading day of the month, of the quarter, and the everything rally is back in force today. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, as you said he does expect to reach some kind of stimulus deal with House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So we're all waiting with bated breath. So you're seeing big caps, small caps, techs, cyclicals, all up. And for the Dow, S&P, and NASDAQ, this is the fourth gain in 5 days, which is why you're seeing gains of more than 1.5% for these indexes for the intraday for the industry groups. Now, the ADP employment report was also better than expected, so perhaps that's a hopeful sign before the official monthly jobs report on Friday. Banks, we should mention, higher on those stimulus hopes. Hospitals higher after the debate, although I'm not sure we really learned anything when it comes to policy on the debate. Look, the big takeaway from last night's debate was President Trump's refusal to commit to accept the legitimacy of whatever election outcome there is. And here's what Nouriel Rubini told us earlier today.
Most likely, we're not going to know who's the winner. It's going to be contested for weeks, if not for months. You could have a 10% correction just because of that, if you have a very severe, protracted, ugly, and contested situation.
So he sees perhaps a 10% correction if there is no outcome and if this drags on. But hopefully, we won't get to that point.
Yeah, we can hope that that's true. Who knows, given that debate last night. So, Scarlett, there's one outfit that's pretty happy today, I suspect, with this up market, and that is Palantir. They're coming out with their it's not an IPO, actually. It's a direct listing. Yeah. It's a good day to do that.
Good day, good backdrop because of all the gains in the equity market overall. This is a direct listing, which is different from an IPO in that the company is not selling new shares. It's not issuing new shares. So it's not raising new money as a result. Existing shareholders aren't diluted. Usually there's no lockup period in a direct listing, but Palantir has placed some limits on how much insiders like employees and early investors can cash out, at least initially. So we haven't had a first trade yet, but the NYSE set a reference price of $2.75. That's based on recent secondary trading performance. This is not the opening price. It's kind of a floor that allows the price discovery process to begin. What you're looking at here are projected revenues, at least for the first half of 2020 for Palantir. This is a money-losing, unprofitable data mining company founded by Peter Thiel. 2020 revenue is seen rising about 41 to 43% and surpassing $1 billion as well. You could see for the first half, again, just shy of $500 million. Palantir has said that it will turn profitable this year on an adjusted basis, excluding stock compensation. What I find really interesting, David, about Palantir is that not only was it named for the all-seeing stones in Tolkien's Lord of the Rings, one of the early investors was the nonprofit venture investing arm of the CIA. And this is a company that's very much dependent on government contracts.
Yeah, they get a lot of money out of the CIA and the government generally. Thank you so much to Scarlett Fu. Up next, we'll continue our swing state review with Republican Congressman Bill Johnson of Ohio. This is Balance of Power, and we are on Bloomberg Television and on radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. For Bloomberg First Word News, we go now to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you very much. It was billed as the first presidential debate, but last night's event in Cleveland, Ohio, quickly turned into a debacle, insults drowning out issues. At one point, President Trump and Joe Biden battled over the coronavirus.
He knew it was a deadly disease. What did he do? He's on tape as acknowledging he knew it. He said he didn't tell us or give people a warning of it because he didn't want to panic the American people. You don't panic. He panicked.
We've done a great job. The only thing I haven't done a good job, and that's because of the fake news. No matter what you say to them, they give you bad press on it. It's just fake news. They give you good press. They give me bad press because that's the way it is, unfortunately. But let me just tell you something. I don't care. I've gotten used to it. But I'll tell you, Joe, you could never have done the job that we did. You don't have it in your blood. You could have never done that job.
I know how to do the job. I know how to get the job
Well, you didn't do very well in swine flu.
Moderator Chris Wallace had a hard time trying to keep control of the discussion. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin says he sees one more chance at securing a deal with Democrats on a fiscal stimulus package while stopping short of the $2.2 trillion proposal from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. The two sides are set to meet shortly. Secretary Mnuchin says he expects the number to be closer to $1.5 trillion in a plan put forward by a bipartisan group of House members. The proposal would escalate spending up to $2 trillion if the virus pandemic persists. Fans are mourning the death of Australian singer, actor, and activist Helen Reddy. Her death yesterday was announced by her family on Facebook. Miss Reddy was best known for her song I Am Woman, which became the unofficial anthem of the feminist movement in the 1970s. Reddy was diagnosed with dementia in 2015. Helen Reddy was 78 years old. Global news 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thank you so much, Mark. President Trump and former Vice President Biden were speaking to the nation last night, but they were also very specifically speaking to voters in the swing state of Ohio. Welcome now Republican Congressman Bill Johnson, who represents Ohio's 6th congressional district, which sits in the southeast part of the state, bordering Kentucky, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania. Welcome, Congressman. As you just pointed out to me, it's the longest district, as I understand it, east of the Mississippi. Is that right?
It is. It absolutely is. It goes from about an hour outside of Cleveland to an hour outside of Cincinnati. I get a lot of windshield time.
Yeah, I'll bet you do. So give us your take on how you think your constituents are responding to what they heard in that debate last night. There was an awful lot of interruption, talking over one another, some name-calling, things like that. But what of substance do you think your constituents took away from it?
Well, there is no question about it. It was a lively exchange. You know, Chris Wallace had a very tough job. Moderating a presidential debate is always tough, but in the end, it ended up 2-on-1 because Chris Wallace joined with Joe Biden to gang up on the president. I mean, Joe Biden got softball questions. The president, who's only been in office for a little over 3.5 years, got grilled on his record, and yet Biden's 47-year record was never even touched. But what my people saw, and I've had a number of phone calls this morning, is that it reconfirmed for America the stark policy differences between the two candidates. You know, the section on law and order was especially clear because former Vice President Biden couldn't even name one single law enforcement group that supports him. President Trump forcefully highlighted his record of success over the last 4 years and talked about a lot of the hard work left to do. But the only thing that Americans remember about Joe Biden's performance is that he said he is the Democrat Party. He is the radical left of his party. And his refusal to back down from their far-left progressive platform, including his pledge to repeal President Trump's tax cuts, which will hurt the people that I represent tremendously, that's just a non-starter for our folks. And here's just a few cutting through the noise things that Biden said. He said Antifa is an idea, not an organization. We know that's not true. He said he'll shut down America's economy because of COVID. That's not going to work. He promised to raise everybody's taxes. He struggled to say that he supports law and order. He said he's not for the Green New Deal, yet the Green New Deal is the first thing on his website that he says he does support.
Okay, so Congressman, there's a lot of things in there, and so I want to break down some of them. Let's start with Antifa. In fact, the head of the FBI has said this is not an organization with a head and an organization. It is a movement. It's been around, as you know, since the 1930s in Germany. So what Vice President Biden said was not false. In fact, the head of the FBI said just the same thing.
Well, that's a big difference, though, between being just an idea and being a movement, because somebody is funding these people. We know that they're getting money to travel from place to place to place to stir up the trouble that they're stirring up. If that's not an organization, I don't know what it is. So I think we're having a play on semantics and a play on words. In the military, I learned if it walks like a duck, quacks like a duck, and looks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And we know the trouble that Antifa is causing. But the other thing that the Vice President Biden said, he would not commit to not packing the Supreme Court, and you know that is just outside the realms of responsible governing.
Congressman, try to explain that to me. I want to get back to President Trump in a moment, but explain that to me why that's outside the realm. Because at the very beginning of the debate, President Trump was asked about coming up with a nominee and putting it in before the election, which is something that has not been done before. And he said, if you've got the votes, then it's justified. Well, if they have the votes to increase the Supreme Court, why is that outside the norms? President Trump said it's a question of whether you have the votes or not.
Sure. Well, the problem is this. Harry Reid, the Democrat majority leader in the Senate, was the one that made the rules for how judicial appointments are going to be done. He declared the nuclear option during the Obama administration. So he established the rules. And Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said in 2016, when President Obama was leaving office, we had a president of one party, the Senate of another party. We had divided government. But the American people, Biden said last night, let's let the American people speak. They did speak, David. They spoke in 2016. They spoke again in 2018 when they increased the number in the Senate, largely because of the president's promise that he was going to appoint conservative justices to the Supreme Court. So this is not overly complicated. The Constitution gives the president the authority and the right to nominate. It gives the Senate the right and the responsibility to advise and consent through the confirmation process, and that's what the man is doing. He's doing his constitutional duty.
Yeah, fair enough. As he said last night, elections have consequences, as this one will as well. But let me ask you one last question about President Trump. Sure. Because you pointed out how Vice President Biden did not, and I agree with you, did not really step up on the law and order the way some people, I think, would have liked to have done. On the other hand, what about stepping up on calling white supremacists back off? When President Trump was pressed on that, he said, stand down but stand by, when he was talking about the Proud Boys, which is a far-right extremist, violent group, isn't it?
Well, look, I might have answered that question differently if I'd been standing on the stage, but there was a lot of noise going on at that point. Biden was talking over the president. Chris Wallace was talking over the president. The president was trying to listen to the question, and he was also trying to listen to what Joe Biden was saying. It was during that period of time that the president was being ganged up on. I know this president. I've heard him speak privately, and I can guarantee you that he does not support and he does not stand with white supremacists. He does not. And anybody that wants to fabricate another false claim and say that he does, it's just irresponsible, David.
So finally, Congressman, I really want to get your take on Ohio specifically, because just today, the Cook Political Report actually moved it into a swing state status with respect to Vice President Biden versus President Trump. How do you see Ohio breaking down in the presidential election this year?
I'm not surprised that the Cook Report is taking that position. They were wrong in 2016, so they're kind of trying to figure out how to put salve on their wounds here in 2020. They were saying as late as 7:30 on election night that Hillary Clinton was going to be the next president or president-elect, and we now know how that turned out. So I'm not surprised that Cook and maybe other pollsters are saying that, but I can tell you, I live in Ohio, and I work throughout eastern and southeastern Ohio, and the enthusiasm for this president today far exceeds what it was in 2016, and there is no way that it is a close election in Ohio. The president is going to take Ohio. He's going to take North Carolina. He's going to take Florida. And the president's going to win this election.
Congressman, it's really valuable to have your perspective. I can't tell you enough how we appreciate your being with us. That's Congressman Bill Johnson. He's Republican of Ohio. Coming up, how undecided voters reacted to last night's chaotic debate. Pollster Frank Luntz spoke with some uncommitted swing state voters after the fireworks ended. What did he learn from his focus group? That's coming up next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David West, and we have some breaking news right now. Shares in Asana have just started trading for the first time. It's a software maker, and it's debuting by a direct listing, not an IPO. This is the last day of the New York Stock Exchange's busiest month ever for IPOs and direct listings, because we're still waiting for Palantir to start trading. Frank Luntz, in the meantime, turning back to the debate, Frank Luntz has had a career putting together polls, analyzing poll results, and advising on strategy from what he learns from the people he talks to. He was at the debate in Cleveland last night and put together a focus group on undecided voters from 7 swing states, whom he talked with in detail after the event. And here's a taste of what they had to tell him.
I almost feel like I need to see another debate now just to confirm what I saw tonight in terms of Biden's ability to stand up to Trump.
I know Donald Trump after the past 4 years. I know what he's going to say. I know what he's going to do. I know what his policies are going to be, so on and so forth. Biden, he didn't convince me of anything.
Trump is annoying. He's unpresidential, at least in our definition, historically of what presidential is. And he's annoying, and it's like nails on a chalkboard, but him acting that way doesn't necessarily impact my bottom line.
Biden being the center left and Trump being unhinged and frankly a poor leader is what has directed my decision.
What I want to see in the next two debates is why should Joe be elected, not why I shouldn't vote for Trump.
Correct.
Trump's not presidential. We've gotten that.
And here is the man himself. He is Frank Luntz of Frank Luntz Global. Frank, great to have you with us again, as you were last night. So tell us, as you listen to these people talk, and obviously they have very different points of view, what was the overall impression you took away from what they got out of that debate last night?
Well, I was very fortunate that I had an ongoing chat, and I was in the 6th row watching the debate, and nobody could see what was going on around me. But for the entire debate, they were commenting on it. So I was able to follow their points of view as it was happening. First time anyone's ever been able to do it in a national debate. And what I found fascinating is that they started off pretty strongly for Trump. They liked the fact that he came out affirmative and strong and tough. But that wears well for maybe 15 minutes. And after 30 minutes, they get sick of it. And after 60 minutes, they absolutely hate it. Donald Trump started by really defining what he was about and by disagreeing with Joe Biden. But by the end of the debate, they were simply angry at him because he had not spent any time talking about what he was for. He spent the entire time talking about what he was against. And Joe Biden, who started the debate relatively weak, they did not appreciate that he said to the president, shut up, or that he called the president a clown. No one believes that that's deserved, even if they don't like the president. But by the end, Biden was speaking straight to the camera, as I am to you right now. And when he spoke straight to the camera, there was an emotional appeal that we couldn't feel in the hall, but they could feel at home watching him. And his appeal, mentioning the loss of his son, Beau, when Joe Biden got emotional and he talked about fighting for working class Americans, that's what the public wants to hear. That was Donald Trump in 2016. I'm going to fight for the ignored. I'm going to fight for the forgotten. I'm going to be your voice in Washington. Best line of the campaign. In 2020, Donald Trump is fighting for himself. And that's what voters don't like.
So, Frank, people might have liked Vice President Biden last night more than President Trump, but does it mean they're going to vote for Vice President Trump? Are we switching any votes here as a practical matter?
You started to switch some votes, and both of them gained some votes. But what I learned last night is about likability. It's not the person that you want to sit next to at the bar. It's not who you want to share a drink with. It's actually, do they like you? Does Donald Trump like Americans? Does Joe Biden, does he care about people? And Joe Biden clearly won that exchange yesterday. And Donald Trump, in his tone and his demeanor, was so aggressive that it really did turn people off. So when we ask people questions at the end, give me a word or phrase to describe Joe Biden, most of the comments were pretty positive. When we got a word or phrase to describe Donald Trump, most of them, almost all of them, were very negative. It moved a couple of people towards Trump. More people moved towards Biden. I think that when you look at the polls in 48 hours, I think you're going to find that, frankly, that Donald Trump failed in his mission to crack that Biden lead.
And I hope you'll come back and explain that to us at the time, because it's really a pleasure to have you with us, Frank. He was with us last night, with us today. He's the pollster, Frank Luntz, CEO of Luntz Global. Recapping that breaking news from earlier, shares in software company Asana have started trading. They're sharply higher right now. We're still waiting for Palantir to debut. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. Andrew Weissman is one of the most experienced federal criminal prosecutors of his generation, heading the Enron task force, working as head of the criminal fraud section of the Department of Justice, and most recently as a senior member of Bob Mueller's special counsel team investigating Russian interference in the 2016 election. And he's written a new book about that last experience, Where Law Ends, Inside the Mueller Investigation. Welcome now to Bloomberg, and we're joined by my colleague Greg Farrell, who reports on financial investigation Investigations and Enforcement for Bloomberg. So, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us. Andrew, let me start with you and ask the ultimate question. In retrospect, do you think that the Mueller investigation succeeded in its mission?
I think there are ways that it did succeed. It accomplished an enormous amount, and I tried to recount the various successes and how we got there, trying to walk a reader through how the investigation pieced together so much information, from Paul Manafort giving internal campaign polling data to a Russian operative, to how Russia attacked our election. At the same time, I didn't want to write an easy book, which was just how we overcame the interference of the White House. Take a hard look at things that we did well, but also things that we could have done better. And in that score, I offered my own assessment as to things that I thought we should have done differently.
Yes, Andrew. This is Greg Farrell, and I spent a couple of years covering the Mueller investigation, or at least trying to, because unfortunately for me, there were no leaks from it. So I've found all the detail in the book to be fascinating. And I do want to go back to what you were talking about. Much has been made of some of the failures of the special counsel's work in terms of the big picture, which we'll get to. But in terms of success, yes, the indictments against the Internet Research Agency and the GRU members, that now that we're 5 weeks away from the next election, it seems like a message that's gotten shouted out in the din of everything that's going on is this was an active effort 4 years ago, and as far as we know, it's probably happening again.
Absolutely. So one of the things that's really a shame that I write about is there's clear evidence that Russia interfered in our election, and analogizing this to Pearl Harbor. After Pearl Harbor, the country banded together, understood it was under attack, and it wasn't politicized. Everyone knew who had attacked us and that something had to be done. Here, what has gotten muddied is the people who try to politicize that issue with whether somebody on the Trump campaign, quote, colluded, which, as you know, is not a legal term, with Russia. But leave that aside. Let's assume there's no evidence of that. It still doesn't mean you ignore what it is that Russia did. And that's where I really think that the country has a long way to go in defending itself and hardening the target so that we are not subject to interference from foreign countries.
So, as you say in the introduction to the book, one of the reasons you wrote this is because, like Watergate beforehand, it helps to have a first-person account of what actually happened. Looking back in history and comparing that to what happened with the special counsel's office, it's clear that the special counsel's structure and the constant drumbeat threat of Mueller being fired had an effect on the steps that you guys took. Would that be a fair judgment?
I do think that's fair, and a really good point, Greg, that one of the things that I think is really useful is, and the reason I wrote the book, is so that people can see what we did, what we didn't do, and some of the ways in which the current special counsel rules inhibited our ability to speak publicly and to what I call the educational function of the special counsel's office. I analogize to Archibald Cox in the Watergate era, and I'm old enough to actually remember this, where he spoke out about why he was seeking the Nixon tapes and explained that to the public. And I think the current special counsel rules, where we are just a part of the Department of Justice and don't have the ability to speak unilaterally about what happened, does a disservice to educating the American public about what we did, why we did it, and also what we didn't do. And I think the rules do need to change, because God forbid we're in this situation with respect to another president. You want to make sure that the rules are conducive to making sure that the public understands what it is that a special counsel is doing.
So, Andrew, I think we have about 1 minute left, and we come right up against this, the special counsel, the constrictions, restrictions about it, and who the person is. And in Robert Mueller, whom you know very well, and I've followed his career for decades, just an admirable public servant. and clearly the type of guy who does not want to play in the press, clearly the type of guy who doesn't want to put himself front and center. That turned out to be a real inhibition towards the efforts of the office, was it not?
Well, Bob Mueller is a national treasure, and his sense of the press, as I recount, is you live by the press, you die by the press. So that's just not him as a person. But I do think that it would be useful to have rules where we could go public to say, look, here's why we did not subpoena the president, something I think we should have done. And I write about how I think it sets a bad precedent. But it would have been useful to have a discussion about that. It would have been useful to have discussion about why we didn't look at the finances of the president.
Yeah, as Greg said, a really interesting peek inside the tent there that we're getting from this book. That's Andrew Weissman, author of Where Law Ends, Inside the Mueller Investigation, and Bloomberg's Greg Farrell. Thank you so much. And this is Bloomberg.